She whispered those 4 words through cracked lips, and the Lakota warrior froze mid-step, his hand hovering above the snakeskin he was about to grab, because somehow this pale stranger bleeding into the canyon dust had seen the danger coiled beneath the rock before he did. The canyon walls rose like broken teeth against a sky too wide to trust. Hannah Granger stumbled through sage and stone, her boots worn through at the heels, her dress torn at the hem where it had caught on juniper branches 3 miles back. Sweat carved lines through the dust on her face. Her breathing came sharp and shallow, each inhale scraping her throat like sand. The late afternoon sun pressed down on her shoulders with the weight of judgment itself. She had been walking for 2 days. No horse, no water since dawn, no company but the buzzards circling lazy overhead. Behind her, somewhere in the vastness of the Wyoming Territory, lay the wreckage of a wagon train, the scattered bones of a dream that had died screaming. She did not look back. Looking back had never saved anyone. Her name was Hannah Granger, 24 years old, daughter of a Philadelphia preacher who had promised her that the West held salvation for those brave enough to seek it. He had been wrong. The West held only distance, and distance swallowed people whole. She had watched it happen, watched the fever take her mother first, then her father, then the others one by one, until the wagon master himself lay cold in his bedroll and the survivors scattered like seeds in a windstorm. Hannah kept walking because stopping meant dying, and she was not ready to die. Not yet. Not here in this God-forsaken stretch of red rock and rattlesnake country where even the shadows seemed to carry teeth. Her lips had cracked days ago. Her tongue felt thick and useless. Every step sent pain shooting up through her blistered feet, but she kept moving, because movement was the only prayer she had left. The canyon narrowed ahead, walls closing in like the sides of a grave. She could hear water somewhere, the faint trickle of a creek hidden among the stones. Her pulse quickened. Water meant life. Water meant another day. She pushed forward, hands braced against the rock face, pulling herself along inch by stubborn inch. Her vision swam. The heat pressed against her skull like a vice. She thought she saw shapes moving in the shimmer of air rising from stone, ghost dancers from stories her father used to tell, warnings about the godless wilderness and the savages who ruled it. But when she blinked hard and focused, there was nothing but rock and sky and the relentless sun bearing down. That was when she saw him. He stood in the shadow of an overhang, tall and still as the stone itself. Buckskin shirt, dark hair bound back with a strip of leather, a knife sheathed at his hip. His skin was bronze in the slanted light, his face unreadable as carved wood. He was Lakota. She knew that much from the beadwork on his moccasins, from the way he held himself like a man who belonged to the land rather than the other way around. Hannah froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had heard the stories, the warnings whispered around campfires by men who claimed to know better. Savages, they called them. Killers, thieves, women stolen in the night, scalps taken as trophies, entire families wiped out for crossing invisible boundaries drawn in blood and history. But standing here now, staring at this man who had not moved, had not spoken, had not reached for his weapon, she felt something else entirely. Not fear, not exactly. Something closer to recognition. He watched her the way a wolf watches, patient and measuring. His eyes were dark, unblinking, taking in every detail of her ragged appearance. She must have looked like death itself, pale and trembling, blood dried on her arms from where the brush had torn her skin. The sun had burned her face red and raw. Her dress hung on her frame like a burial shroud. She waited for him to speak, to shout, to do something, but he only stood there in the quiet. The silence stretched between them like a physical thing. Hannah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could hear the distant cry of a hawk somewhere high above, could hear the wind moving through the canyon like the breath of something ancient and unknowable. She knew she should run, should turn and flee back the way she came, but her legs would not obey. They had carried her as far as they could. Finally, she found her voice. It came out cracked and small, barely more than a whisper. "Please," she said. "I need water." He did not answer. Instead, he turned and walked deeper into the canyon, his steps sure and soundless on the stone. Hannah hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to do anything but follow a stranger into the shadows. But thirst won out over fear. It always did. She stumbled after him, her legs shaking with exhaustion, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the canyon wall. The stone was hot beneath her palm, holding the day's heat like a living thing. She could feel her pulse beating against the rock, or maybe it was the other way around. The canyon seemed to breathe around her, expanding and contracting with each step she took. She wondered if this was how it felt to die, this strange floating sensation where the world became both more vivid and more distant at the same time. The canyon opened into a small clearing where a creek ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Trees grew here, cottonwoods with leaves that whispered in the breeze. It felt like another world, hidden and untouched. The man knelt by the water and filled a leather pouch, then stood and held it out to her without a word. Hannah stared at the offering. Her throat burned, her vision blurred at the edges. She reached out with trembling fingers and took the pouch, half expecting him to pull it back, to laugh, to reveal some cruel joke. But he only watched as she drank, gulping down the cold water until it spilled over her chin and soaked the front of her dress. She drank until her stomach cramped, until the world stopped spinning quite so violently. When she finally lowered the pouch, gasping, she looked up at him. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, barely recognizable as her own. He still did not speak. He turned and walked to a flat stone near the creek, sat down, and began working on something in his hands. Hannah stood there uncertain, her mind racing. Should she leave? Should she stay? Was this hospitality or something else? She had no map for this moment, no guidebook for how to navigate kindness from a stranger who should have been an enemy. She sat down slowly on a rock a few feet away, her legs finally giving out. The relief of sitting, of stopping, nearly brought tears to her eyes. She watched him work, saw that he was weaving something from grass and sinew, his fingers quick and precise. The silence stretched between them, not hostile but heavy with unasked questions. The creek sang its quiet song. A breeze moved through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of water and green things. Hannah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. She had forgotten what peace felt like, had forgotten that the world could be anything other than harsh and unforgiving. After a long while he spoke. His voice was low and rough, shaped by a language that was not English, but carried English words within it. "You are far from your people," Hannah nodded. "They're dead," she said simply. "All of them?" He did not look up from his work. "The sickness?" "Ah, yes," she said. "And the hunger, and the cold, and everything else this land wanted to throw at us." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "This land does not throw anything, it only is. People bring their own endings with them." Hannah felt a flash of anger rise in her chest. "Easy for you to say. You know how to survive here. I was born here," he said. "That is different than knowing. Knowing takes longer." She wanted to argue, to push back against his calm certainty, but exhaustion dragged at her like chains. Instead she asked, "What's your name?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. "Tashunka," he said. "Hannah," she said. "Hannah Granger." He nodded once, as if the exchange had settled something between them. Then he returned to his weaving. The creek sang its quiet song. The wind moved through the cottonwood leaves. For the first time in days, Hannah felt something other than terror. She felt the possibility of rest, but rest in the west was always temporary. The sun began to sink behind the canyon walls, painting the sky in shades of fire and bruise. Long shadows stretched across the clearing, like fingers reaching for something just out of grasp. Tashunka stood and gestured toward a small shelter built into the rock face, barely more than a lean-to made of branches and hide. "You will sleep there," he said. It was not a question. Hannah looked at the shelter, then back at him. "Where will you sleep?" "You're near," he said. "To watch? Watch for what?" He met her eyes again, and this time she saw something flicker in his expression. Not fear, but caution. "Men follow women who run," he said quietly. Even here, her blood went cold. She had not thought about pursuit, had not imagined that anyone would bother tracking a lone survivor through this wilderness. But of course they would. Men always did. Men who saw a woman alone and thought she was something to be taken, something to be owned. The wagon train had been full of such men, hiding their appetites behind Bible verses and talk of manifest destiny. "Are they close?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Not yet," Tashunka said. "But they will come." "They always come." Hannah felt the weight of that truth settle over her like a shroud. She was not safe. She would never be safe, not really, not in a world that saw her as prey. But here, in this hidden canyon with this strange man who had given her water without asking for anything in return, she felt closer to safety than she had in months. She walked to the shelter and crawled inside. The ground was covered with dried grass, soft enough to ease the ache in her bones. She lay down and closed her eyes, listening to the sound of Tashunka moving around the camp, building a small fire, settling in for the night. She wanted to stay awake, to keep watch, to protect herself. But her body had other plans. Sleep took her fast and deep, pulling her down into darkness. She dreamed of fire, dreamed of screaming, dreamed of hands reaching for her through smoke and shadow. In the dream, her mother stood at the back of a burning wagon, calling her name, but when Hannah ran toward her, the distance only grew longer. Her father knelt in the dirt, praying to a God who had stopped listening months ago. The wagon master laughed, his face split open by disease, his eyes empty as windows in an abandoned house. She woke with a gasp, her heart racing, sweat cold on her skin. The fire had burned down to embers. The canyon was dark except for the stars scattered overhead like broken glass. For a moment she did not know where she was. Then memory came flooding back, and with it a fresh wave of grief, so powerful it nearly choked her. Tashunka sat near the fire, his back to a stone, his knife resting across his knees. He was awake, watching the darkness beyond the firelight. When he heard her stir, he glanced over but said nothing. There was no judgment in his expression, no pity, only acknowledgement. Hannah sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. "Do you ever sleep?" she asked. "When it is safe," he said. "And it's not safe now?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Safety is a story people tell themselves. I do not believe in stories." Hannah pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. "Then what do you believe in?" He looked at her across the dying fire, his face half-shadowed, half-lit. "That the sun will rise," he said. "That water runs downhill. That people are dangerous when they are afraid. These things do not change." She wanted to argue, to insist that there was more to the world than cold facts and hard truths. But sitting here in the dark, far from everything she had ever known, she could not find the words. Maybe he was right. Maybe the only real things were the ones you could touch and taste and see. Maybe faith was just another word for foolishness. The night stretched on. Neither of them spoke again. Hannah lay back down but did not sleep. She listened to the creak, to the wind, to the steady rhythm of Tashunka's breathing. She wondered what kind of man gave water to a stranger. What kind of man stayed awake through the night to guard someone he did not know? She wondered if he had a family somewhere, a wife, children. She wondered what his life had been before this moment, before her. She wondered if trust was something you earned or something you chose. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Hannah had learned some of their names from her father, back when he still believed the heavens held answers. Orion the hunter, Cassiopeia the queen, the North Star that guided travelers home. But lying here now, she could not remember which lights belonged to which stories. They were just stars, cold and distant, indifferent to the struggles of the people crawling across the earth below them. By the time the first light touched the canyon rim, Hannah had made her choice. She would trust him, not because he had proven himself, but because she had no other option. And sometimes in the West, that was the only reason anyone needed. Morning came slow and cold. The canyon walls caught the light and held it, turning the stone to gold. Hannah crawled out of the shelter, her muscles stiff and aching. Every movement sent fresh pain through her body, reminders of how close she had come to giving up entirely. Tashunka was already up, crouched by the creek, washing his face in the icy water. He looked as if he had not slept at all. He glanced at her as she approached. "You are stronger than you look," he said. It was not a compliment, just an observation. Hannah nodded. "I've had practice." He stood and walked to a small pack leaning against a rock. From it he pulled dried meat and a handful of berries, which he divided between them. They ate in silence, the food tough and bland but real. Hannah had never tasted anything better. Each bite felt like a small miracle, proof that she was still alive, still capable of hunger and satisfaction. When they finished, Tashunka said, "We will move today. This place is known. Others will come. Where will we go?" Hannah asked. "North," he said, "to the hills. There are places there where even hunters do not go." Hannah looked at him, at the certainty in his face, and felt something shift inside her. She had been running blind, stumbling through the wilderness without direction or hope. But now, for the first time, she had a guide. Someone who knew the land, who understood its rhythms and dangers. Someone who had chosen, for reasons she did not yet understand, to help her survive. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. Tashunka paused, his hand on the strap of his pack. He looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he said, "Because you did not run when you saw me. Because you asked instead of taking. Because this world has enough ghosts already." The words hung between them, simple and stark. Hannah felt her throat tighten. She nodded, unable to speak. In that moment, she understood that whatever happened next, whatever dangers waited for them in the northern hills, she was no longer alone. And that made all the difference. They gathered what little they had and left the canyon as the sun climbed higher. Tashunka led the way, moving through the landscape with the ease of someone who had walked these paths 1,000 times. Hannah followed, her steps unsteady but determined. She did not know where they were going. She did not know what waited for them in the northern hills. But for the first time since the wagon train fell apart, she felt something other than despair. She felt the faint, fragile possibility of survival. And in the West, that was more than most people ever got. They climbed through country that seemed determined to kill anything soft enough to bleed. Tashunka moved ahead like smoke, his footfalls silent on stone that would have announced Hannah's presence to everything within a mile. She struggled behind him, her breathing ragged, her hands scraped raw from catching herself on rocks when her exhausted legs gave out. The sun climbed with them, turning the air into something thick and punishing. By midday, they had left the canyon system behind and entered a landscape of rolling hills covered in sparse grass and scattered pine. The ground here was treacherous, hidden with gopher holes and loose shale that shifted underfoot. Hannah's boots, already falling apart, threatened to give up completely with each step. She could feel blisters forming on top of blisters, layers of pain that she had learned to push into some distant corner of her mind. Tashunka stopped at the crest of a hill and waited for her to catch up. When she finally reached him, gasping, he pointed to a thin line of smoke rising in the distance, maybe 2 miles to the east. "Trading post," he said. "White men. They sell whiskey and lies." Hannah stared at the smoke. Part of her wanted to run toward it, to find other people who spoke her language, who understood where she came from. But another part, the part that had kept her alive these past days, held her back. "Are they dangerous?" she asked. "All men are dangerous," Tashunka said. "But these ones are drunk more often than sober. They will ask questions. They will want to know where you came from and where you are going. They will want to know why you travel with me. What should I tell them?" He looked at her with something that might have been amusement. "Nothing," he said. "We will not go there." They turned west instead, following a game trail that wound through stands of juniper and pinon. The air smelled of resin and dust. Hannah's stomach had stopped growling hours ago, settling into a hollow ache that she tried to ignore. She wondered how long a person could walk on nothing but dried meat and creek water. She wondered how long before her body simply refused to continue. Tashunka seemed to sense her exhaustion without looking back. He slowed his pace slightly, stopped more frequently to let her rest. At one such stop, beneath the shade of a gnarled pine, he pulled a small pouch from his pack and offered it to her. Inside were seeds, tiny and dark. "Chew these," he said. "They will help." Hannah took a small handful and put them in her mouth. They tasted bitter and earthy, but within minutes she felt a subtle shift in her energy, as if her body had found some hidden reserve to draw upon. She looked at him with surprise. "What are these?" "Sunflower seeds," he said. "My people carry them on long journeys. The land provides if you know where to look." They continued walking. The afternoon wore on, hot and still. Hannah found herself studying Tashunka as they traveled, trying to understand this man who had appeared in her life like some kind of spirit guide. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested years of training, years of surviving in a world that demanded perfection or death. His eyes constantly scanned the landscape, reading signs that Hannah could not see. A bent blade of grass, a disturbed stone. "The way birds flew overhead, how do you know where to go?" she asked during another rest stop. He took a drink from his water pouch before answering. "The land tells stories if you listen. See those tracks?" He pointed to marks in the dust that Hannah would have walked right past. "Deer came through here this morning, heading to water. That means there is a creek ahead, probably within a mile. See how the grass grows thicker there, in that depression? Water collects there when it rains. The trees know where the moisture is. Follow them, and you find life." Hannah looked at the landscape with new eyes, trying to see what he saw. It remained mostly incomprehensible to her, a wilderness without language. But she was learning, slowly, painfully. She was learning that survival was not about strength or determination alone. It was about attention. About reading the world instead of imposing your will upon it. They found the creek exactly where Tashunka had predicted, a narrow ribbon of water cutting through red rock. They stopped to fill their water pouches and rest in the shade. Hannah soaked her blistered feet in the cold water and nearly cried from the relief. Tashunka sat nearby, once again working on his weaving, his fingers creating patterns that seemed to hold meaning she could not decipher. "What are you making?" she asked. "A snare," he said. "For rabbit. We will need more food soon." The practicality of his answer struck her. While she had been focused on simply putting one foot in front of the other, he had been planning ahead, thinking about tomorrow and the day after. She realized that survival was not a single act, but a series of small preparations. A constant negotiation with the future as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen. Tashunka stood and tested his snare, then tucked it into his pack. "We should reach the foothills before dark," he said. "There is a place there where we can shelter. It is hidden safe." They set out again, climbing gradually as the land rose toward distant mountains. The terrain grew rockier, more difficult. Hannah's legs trembled with fatigue, but she pushed forward, driven by the promise of shelter and safety. The sun sank lower, painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple. A cool breeze rose, carrying the scent of pine and stone. That was when they heard the voices. Tashunka stopped so suddenly that Hannah nearly ran into him. He held up one hand, a clear signal for silence, and tilted his head, listening. Hannah stood frozen, her heart suddenly pounding. The voices came from somewhere ahead, male voices, rough and loud with drink. They were singing, some bawdy song about a woman in a saloon. The sound carried clearly in the evening air. Tashunka gestured for Hannah to follow and moved quickly off the trail, leading her behind a jumble of large boulders. They crouched in the shadows waiting. Within minutes, 3 men came into view on the trail below. They were white, dressed in the rough clothing of trappers or prospectors, their faces hidden beneath bushy beards. One carried a rifle, another a bottle that he passed to his companions. They were moving east, back toward the trading post Tashunka had pointed out earlier. Hannah held her breath, pressing herself against the stone. She could see Tashunka beside her, coiled and ready, his hand on his knife. The men passed within 20 feet of their hiding spot, oblivious to the watchers in the rocks. One of them stumbled and cursed, nearly dropping the bottle. The others laughed, a sound that held more cruelty than joy. "Should have stayed at Miller's place," one of them said. "At least he's got decent whiskey." "Miller's got nothing but watered-down piss," another replied. "Besides, I heard there's a wagon train broke up somewhere out here. Might be pickings to find." "Pickings," the third man laughed. "That what you call it?" "More like salvage work. Though I wouldn't mind finding me a lost settler girl." "Been too long since I had proper company?" The other men laughed, and the sound made Hannah's skin crawl. She understood now why Tashunka had avoided the trading post, why he moved with such caution through this wilderness. The danger was not just from the land, but from the men who wandered through it, men who saw opportunity in other people's suffering. The voices faded as the men continued down the trail. Tashunka waited until the sound had disappeared completely before moving. He turned to Hannah, and in the fading light she could see the concern in his eyes. "They are looking for survivors from your wagon train," he said quietly. "They will spread the word. More will come." Hannah felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "What do we do?" "We move faster," he said, "and we stay out of sight." They emerged from behind the boulders and continued their climb, moving more quickly now despite Hannah's exhaustion. The sky darkened from purple to deep blue, and the first stars began to appear. Hannah stumbled repeatedly, her vision blurring, but Tashunka kept them moving. Finally, as full darkness fell, they reached a narrow opening in a rock face, barely visible even when you knew to look for it. Tashunka led her inside, and Hannah found herself in a small cave, its ceiling low enough that she had to duck, but it was dry and sheltered, hidden from the trail below. Tashunka had clearly used this place before. There was a fire pit lined with stones, a small stack of dried wood, even some emergency supplies tucked into a crevice in the rock. He built a fire, keeping it small so the smoke would disperse before it could be seen from below. The flames cast dancing shadows on the cave walls. Hannah collapsed against the stone, every muscle in her body screaming. She had nothing left, no reserves to draw upon. She closed her eyes and fought back tears of exhaustion and fear. Tashunka handed her his water pouch without a word. She drank gratefully, then watched as he pulled out the snare he had made and some dried meat from his pack. He divided the meat between them, his portion noticeably smaller than hers. She wanted to protest, to insist on equal shares, but she was too hungry, and he was already turning away to tend the fire. "Those men," she said after eating. "They're looking for me, for people like me. They are looking for anything they can take," Tashunka said. "That is what they do. They are scavengers, waiting for disaster so they can pick the bones." "I've brought danger to you," Hannah said, her voice thick with guilt. "You should leave me. Go back to your people. I'll find my own way." He looked at her across the fire, his expression unreadable. "My people are 3 days' ride from here," he said. "I was hunting when I found you. I cannot go back yet." "Oh, why not?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I made a choice to help you. Among my people, when you make such a choice, you see it through. To do otherwise would bring shame." Hannah felt her throat tighten. "I don't want to be someone's burden of honor." "You are not a burden," he said simply. "You are a responsibility I chose. There is a difference." The fire crackled between them. Outside, a nightbird called, its cry lonely in the darkness. Hannah pulled her knees to her chest and stared into the flames. She thought about the men on the trail, about their casual cruelty, about how they had laughed at the thought of finding a lost settler girl. She thought about all the ways the world found to remind women that they were prey. "Where I come from," she said quietly, "there are rules about men and women, about what's proper. A woman alone with a man she's not married to, it's considered scandalous. My father would have been horrified by this situation." Tashunka added another piece of wood to the fire. "Your father is dead," he said, not unkindly. "His rules died with him. Out here, the only rule is survival. Is that how your people see it?" "My people have different rules," he said. "But yes, survival comes first. Honor second. Everything else is just noise." Hannah found herself smiling despite everything. "You're very practical." "I am alive," he said. Practical people tend to be—" She laughed then, a short, tired sound that surprised her. When had she last laughed? She could not remember. The sound felt foreign in her throat, like a language she had forgotten how to speak. But it felt good, this small moment of levity in the midst of so much darkness. Tashunka looked at her with something that might have been approval. "Sleep," he said. "I will keep watch." "You need to sleep too," Hannah protested. "I will," he said. "Later. When the moon is high, I will wake you and you can watch while I rest. That is how we will do it from now on. We share the burden." Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she was not strong enough or skilled enough to keep watch. But the exhaustion was pulling at her like a tide, dragging her down into darkness. She lay down near the fire, using her torn shawl as a pillow, and closed her eyes. Just before sleep took her, she heard Tashunka's voice, quiet in the darkness. "You did well today," he said. "Better than I expected. You are learning." The words wrapped around her like a blanket. For the first time since her family died, since the wagon train fell apart, since she began running through this merciless wilderness, Hannah felt something other than fear or grief. She felt pride, small and fragile but real. She fell asleep to the sound of the fire and the steady rhythm of Tashunka's breathing, and for once she did not dream of death. Hannah woke to the sound of rain. Not the gentle rain of Philadelphia springs, but a hard, driving rain that hammered the ground like fists. The cave entrance showed only grey darkness, water streaming down the rock face in sheets. She sat up quickly, disoriented, her hand reaching instinctively for something to hold on to. Tashunka was not inside. Panic flared in her chest. She scrambled to the cave entrance and peered out into the storm. Lightning split the sky, and in that brief flash of white light she saw him. He stood just outside the cave, face turned up to the rain, arms spread wide. Water poured over him, soaking his buckskin shirt until it clung to his skin. He looked like some ancient statue, carved from the storm itself. Hannah stepped out into the downpour. The cold rain shocked her system, washing away the dust and grime that had accumulated over days of travel. It felt like baptism, like the world was offering her a chance to start fresh. She walked up beside Tashunka and tilted her own face skyward, letting the water fill her mouth, run down her throat. It tasted clean and pure, better than any water she had ever known. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The land was thirsty, Tashunka said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "Now it drinks." They stood there together as lightning crackled across the sky and thunder shook the ground beneath their feet. Hannah had never felt so small and so alive at the same time. The storm did not care about her suffering or her survival. It simply was, pouring itself out onto the earth with an indifference that felt almost holy. When the rain finally lessened to a steady drizzle, they returned to the cave. Hannah was shivering, her teeth chattering, but she felt somehow cleaner than she had in months. Tashunka rebuilt the fire, coaxing flames from damp wood with a patience that amazed her. Soon, warmth began to fill the small space, and steam rose from their wet clothing. "We cannot travel in this," Tashunka said, settling beside the fire. "The trails will be mud, too easy to slip to break an ankle. We wait until it passes." Hannah nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "How long will it last?" "The rain decides," he said. "Not us." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm. Hannah found herself studying Tashunka's face in the firelight, noticing details she had missed before. There was a thin scar running along his jawline, barely visible. His hands, though strong and capable, bore the marks of old burns. These were the hands of someone who had lived hard, who had survived things that left marks. "Can I ask you something?" Hannah said finally. He glanced at her. "You can ask. I may not answer." "Fair enough," she said. "Why were you alone when you found me? You said you were hunting, but it seems like you've been out here for more than just a few days." Tashunka stared into the fire for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she had not heard before. "I was sent away," he said. "By my chief, by my father. Hannah waited, not pushing, giving him space to continue or not as he chose. There was a dispute, he said slowly. Overland, over treaty lines. The white men came with papers, saying our hunting grounds now belonged to them. My father, he wanted to negotiate, to find peace. I wanted to fight. We argued. Words were said that cannot be unsaid. So he sent me away, told me to walk the land until I understood the difference between courage and foolishness. How long have you been walking? 3 moons, he said. Almost 4 now. I've walked far, seen much. I have not yet learned what he wanted me to learn. Hannah absorbed this, understanding now why he had helped her. He knew what it felt like to be cast out, to wander without a clear destination. They were both exiles in their own way, both searching for something they could not name. Do you think you'll go back? She asked. When I am ready, he said. When I have something worth bringing home. What kind of something? He smiled then, a rare expression that transformed his entire face. Wisdom, perhaps, or maybe just the knowledge that I can keep one foolish white woman alive in the wilderness. Hannah laughed despite herself. Foolish? I prefer determined. Determined fools are still fools, he said. But there was no cruelty in it, only a gentle teasing that felt almost like friendship. The rain continued through the morning and into the afternoon. They stayed in the cave, tending the fire, talking in fits and starts. Tashunka told her about his childhood, about learning to track deer with his grandfather, about the first time he killed a buffalo and how his whole village celebrated. Hannah told him about Philadelphia, about cobblestone streets and gas lamps, about Sunday services where her father would preach for hours about salvation and sin. Your God sounds angry, Tashunka observed. He was, Hannah admitted. Or at least, that's how my father portrayed him. All fire and judgment, always watching for mistakes. I used to lie awake at night, terrified that I had done something wrong, that I would be punished for thoughts I couldn't control. That is a heavy burden for a child, Tashunka said. It was, Hannah agreed. I think that's part of why I agreed to come west. I thought maybe out here, away from all those rules and expectations, I could find out who I really was. Instead, I just found new ways to be afraid. Tashunka added another stick to the fire. Fear is not the enemy, he said. Fear keeps you alert, keeps you alive. It is only when fear becomes panic that it kills you. The rabbit that freezes when the hawk strikes, that rabbit dies. The rabbit that runs, that uses its fear to move faster, that rabbit lives, so I should keep running. No, he said. You should learn when to run and when to be still. That is the difference between surviving and living. His words settled over her like the rain outside, soaking in slowly. She had been running for so long, first from Philadelphia, then from the wagon train, then from the men who wanted to hurt her. But maybe running was not the answer. Maybe she needed to learn how to stand still, how to read the world around her the way Tashunka did, with patience and attention. By late afternoon, the rain had stopped. The world outside the cave glistened with moisture, every surface reflecting light. The air smelled rich and alive, full of growing things. Tashunka ventured out first, checking the trail, testing the ground. When he returned, he nodded. We can travel, he said. The mud is not too deep, but we go slowly, carefully. They packed up their meager belongings and set out. The landscape had transformed overnight. Where before everything had been brown and dusty, now green shoots pushed up through the soil. Water pooled in low places, creating temporary mirrors that reflected the sky. Birds sang from every bush and tree, celebrating the rain. Hannah found the walking easier somehow, despite the slippery conditions. Perhaps it was the rest, or perhaps it was the conversation with Tashunka, but she felt stronger, more grounded. She watched where she placed her feet, paid attention to the terrain the way he had taught her. When she started to slip, she caught herself, adjusted her balance, kept moving. They traveled north through the afternoon, climbing higher into the foothills. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks still covered in snow despite the season. Hannah had never seen mountains like these, so massive and indifferent, wearing their snow like crowns. They made her feel tiny, insignificant, but also somehow connected to something vast and eternal. As evening approached, they came upon a meadow filled with wildflowers. The rain had awakened them all at once, and the ground was carpeted in colors that Hannah had no names for. Purple and yellow and white and blue, all mixed together in a riot of life. She stopped, unable to help herself, and simply stared. Tashunka stopped beside her. "Beautiful," he said simply. "I didn't think anything this beautiful could exist out here," Hannah whispered. "I thought it was all just desert and death." "The desert is beautiful too," Tashunka said. "You just have to know how to see it. But yes, after the rain, the land remembers joy. This is what it looks like when the earth celebrates." They walked through the meadow slowly, their feet crushing flowers that released sweet scents into the air. Hannah wanted to stop and pick some, to weave them into her hair the way she had as a child, but they needed to keep moving. Still, the image stayed with her, this proof that beauty could emerge even in the harshest places, that life persisted. Despite everything trying to kill it, they made camp that night beside a stream swollen with rainwater. Tashunka set his snare in a likely spot, then showed Hannah how to gather edible plants from the meadow. They found wild onions, their sharp smell making Hannah's eyes water, and something Tashunka called biscuit root, with pale flowers and a taproot that could be roasted. He taught her which plants were safe and which would make her sick, how to identify them by their leaves and stems. "Why are you teaching me all this?" Hannah asked as they worked. "Because knowledge is the only thing you can carry that has no weight," he said. "If we become separated, if something happens to me, you need to know how to survive on your own." The thought of being alone again sent a chill through Hannah. "Nothing's going to happen to you," she said, more firmly than she felt. "Maybe not," Tashunka agreed. "But the wise person prepares for what might be, not just what is." They cooked their foraged food over the fire, along with the dried meat from Tashunka's pack. The meal was simple, but satisfying. Hannah felt her strength returning with each bite, felt her body healing from the inside out. She had lost weight during her ordeal, her dress hanging loose on her frame, but she was adapting. Her muscles, though sore, were growing stronger. Her skin, once soft and pale, was tanning and toughening. She was changing, becoming something new. After they ate, Tashunka checked his snare and found it empty. He reset it without complaint, accepting failure as easily as he accepted success. Hannah admired this quality in him, this ability to meet each moment without attachment to outcome. It was so different from the way she had been raised, where every action carried the weight of eternal consequence. As darkness fell, they sat by the fire and watched the stars emerge. The storm had cleared the air, and the sky seemed impossibly deep, filled with more stars than Hannah had ever seen. She tried to find the constellations her father had taught her, but there were too many stars, too much light. The familiar patterns were lost in the overwhelming brightness. "Do your people have stories about the stars?" she asked. Tashunka nodded. "Many stories. See there, that cluster that looks like a dipper? We call it the Great Bear. The 3 stars in the handle are warriors chasing it across the sky. In autumn, when the leaves turn red, we say it is the blood of the bear dripping from the hunter's arrows. But the bear never dies. Come spring, it rises again, and the hunt continues. It's beautiful," Hannah said. "The story, I mean. The idea that the hunt never ends, but also never succeeds. There's something hopeful about it." "Yes," Tashunka agreed. "It teaches us that struggle is eternal, but so is renewal. Nothing truly ends. Everything cycles back." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to coals. Hannah felt a strange contentment settle over her, despite their circumstances, despite the danger that still lurked somewhere behind them. For this moment, at least, she was warm and fed and safe. She had someone to talk to, someone who saw her as a person rather than a possession or a problem. It was more than she had dared hope for. "Thank you," she said quietly. Tashunka looked at her. "For what?" "For everything, for the water, for not leaving me behind, for teaching me, for treating me like I matter." He held her gaze for a long moment. "You do matter," he said. "Every life matters. The rabbit, the bear, the flower, the stone. All of it is connected. All of it is sacred. To save a life is to honor the whole world." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry, not now. Instead, she nodded and said, "I'll take first watch tonight." "You should rest." Tashunka started to protest, then seemed to think better of it. He nodded and lay down near the fire, his knife within easy reach. Within minutes, his breathing had slowed into the deep rhythm of sleep. Hannah sat with her, back against a tree, watching the darkness beyond the firelight, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness. She thought about everything that had happened, everything she had lost, and everything she had found. She thought about the girl she had been in Philadelphia, so certain of her place in the world, so sure that the rules she had been taught were the only rules that mattered. That girl was gone, burned away by sun and sorrow and survival. In her place was someone new, someone harder and softer at the same time, someone who was learning to see the world through different eyes. The fire crackled. The stream sang its endless song. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, and another answered. Hannah sat guard over the sleeping warrior who had saved her life, and she felt for the first time in longer than she could remember that she was exactly where she needed to be. The fourth day brought heat that shimmered off the rocks like ghosts rising. They had descended from the foothills into a valley where the air hung thick and still, pressing down on them with invisible weight. Hannah's water pouch was nearly empty, and Tashunka's expression had grown increasingly tight as they walked. He was searching for something, his eyes scanning the landscape with an intensity that made her nervous. "What are you looking for?" she asked, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Signs," he said. "We should have crossed another creek by now. The rain should have filled the seasonal streams, but I see no watermarks on the stones. Something is wrong." They pushed forward through country that grew increasingly barren. The wildflowers from yesterday's meadow seemed like a dream now, replaced by scrub brush and thorny plants that caught at Hannah's torn dress. Her feet ached with every step, the blisters now layered so thick she could barely feel new pain forming. She had entered some state beyond exhaustion, where her body moved mechanically and her mind floated somewhere above, detached and observing. It was mid-afternoon when they finally found the creek bed. Dry, completely dry, just a winding channel of cracked mud and sun-bleached stones. Tashunka knelt and touched the ground, rubbing the dust between his fingers. His jaw was set tight, and Hannah could see frustration in the rigid line of his shoulders. "How is this possible?" she asked. "It rained for hours yesterday. Upstream," he said. "Someone has dammed it or diverted it. This water feeds from the mountains. It should be flowing strong after the storm, but it has been blocked. Who would do that?" Tashunka stood and looked north toward the peaks that rose like broken teeth against the sky. "Miners," he said. "They tear open the mountains looking for gold, redirect whole rivers to wash the earth through their sluices. They do not care what happens downstream, do not care who needs the water. They only care about the yellow metal that makes white men crazy." Hannah heard the bitterness in his voice and understood it ran deeper than this moment, deeper than one dry creek bed. This was about invasion, about a way of life being destroyed by people who saw the land as nothing more than resources to be extracted. She had been one of those people once, part of a wagon train heading west to claim land that did not belong. To them to build farms on ground that had sustained other peoples for generations. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. Tashunka was silent for a long moment, thinking. Then he said, "We follow the creek bed upstream, find where the water has been taken. There may be enough for us to refill our pouches before we have to move on. But we must be careful. Miners are territorial, violent. They see everything as theirs to take, everything as a threat to their claims. They walked along the dry creek bed as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The rocks here were different, shot through with veins of crystal that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow fragments. Beautiful and worthless, Hannah thought, at least to men who only valued what could be sold. She bent and picked up a small stone, its surface catching the light like frozen fire. She tucked it into her pocket, a small act of rebellion against the idea that beauty needed to have a price. The sound reached them before they saw its source. Voices, rough and loud, echoing off the canyon walls. The splash of water, the clank of metal on stone. Tashunka held up his hand, signaling for silence, and they crept forward carefully, staying low, using the rocks for cover. When they finally reached a vantage point, Hannah felt her breath catch. The creek had been completely rerouted through a series of wooden channels and canvas sluices. A dozen men worked the operation, shoveling gravel into the flowing water, panning the runoff, their clothes and faces caked with mud. They had carved a wound into the mountainside, leaving raw earth and broken stone, exposed like flesh torn open. The water that should have been flowing down to nourish the valley below was trapped here, serving only the miners' endless hunger for gold. Tashunka's hand tightened on his knife, and Hannah could feel the rage radiating from him. But he did not move, did not reveal their position. He watched with the patience of a hunter, assessing the situation, calculating risks. Finally, he gestured for them to retreat back down the creek bed, away from the mining camp. When they were far enough away to speak safely, Hannah asked, "Can we get to the water?" "Not during the day," Tashunka said. "Too many of them, too exposed. We would be seen immediately. But tonight, when they sleep, when their watch grows lazy with drink, then we might have a chance. It is risky, but we have no choice. Without water, we will not make it another day in this heat." They spent the remaining daylight hours resting in the shade of an overhanging rock, conserving what little energy they had left. Hannah's mouth was so dry, her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. Her head pounded with a dull, persistent ache. She tried not to think about water, tried not to imagine the cool splash of it on her face, in her mouth, down her throat. But the thought consumed her, becoming an obsession that pushed everything else aside. Tashunka seemed to fare better, though she noticed he did not drink from his pouch either, saving what little remained for emergencies. He sat very still, eyes closed, breathing slowly and deliberately. Hannah wondered if he was praying, or meditating, or simply conserving his energy through some technique she did not understand. Everything about him spoke of efficiency, of a lifetime spent learning how to survive with less. As darkness fell, they prepared for the approach. Tashunka checked his knife, made sure it moved smoothly in its sheath. He had Hannah remove anything that might make noise, any loose fabric that might catch on branches. They moved like shadows back up the creek bed, their footsteps silent on the dusty stone. The moon was only a sliver, providing just enough light to see by without fully exposing them. The mining camp glowed with firelight. Hannah could hear the men's voices, drunk and boisterous, arguing about card games and women and claims that might or might not pan out. A bottle passed from hand to hand, and she could smell the harsh scent of whiskey even from their hidden position. Most of the miners had collapsed around the fire, some sleeping, others too drunk to stand. But one man remained alert, sitting apart from the others, a rifle across his knees. Tashunka studied the situation with narrowed eyes. He leaned close to Hannah and whispered directly into her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Stay here. Do not move, do not make a sound. If something goes wrong, if I do not return, you run. You run south back the way we came, and you keep running until you find that trading post. Tell them you were lost from a wagon train. They will help you, even if they are not good men. Understand?" Hannah wanted to protest, wanted to insist she could help, but she knew he was right. She would only be a liability, another thing for him to worry about. She nodded, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone in the camp could hear it. Tashunka moved forward with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. He kept to the deepest shadows, flowing from rock to rock like water finding its path. Hannah lost sight of him almost immediately, her eyes unable to track his movements in the darkness. She crouched behind her boulder, every muscle tense, hardly daring to breathe. Minutes passed like hours. She heard one of the drunk miners begin to sing, a sad song about a girl he had left behind in Missouri. Another told him to shut up, that his voice sounded like a dying cat. Laughter rough and cruel. The guard shifted his position, the rifle scraping against stone, and Hannah's heart leapt into her throat. Then she saw movement near the water channels. Just a flicker, a shadow that might have been nothing. Tashunka was there, crouched low, filling both water pouches with agonizing slowness. The splashing sound seemed impossibly loud to Hannah's ears, but the miners around the fire did not react, too absorbed in their drinking and arguing to notice. The guard was looking the other way, his attention focused on the trail leading into camp. Tashunka finished filling the pouches and began to retreat, still moving with that same fluid grace. He was almost back to the safety of the rocks when it happened. One of the drunk miners stumbled away from the fire, heading toward the water channels to relieve himself. He was fumbling with his trousers, looking down, but he was going to walk right into Tashunka's position. Hannah's mind raced. She had seconds to decide. If the miner saw Tashunka, he would raise the alarm, and they would both be caught or killed. But if she created a distraction, drew attention away from Tashunka's position, she might give him time to escape. It was insane. It was dangerous, but she could see no other choice. She picked up a stone and threw it hard toward the far side of the camp, away from where Tashunka was hiding. The stone clattered loudly against the rocks, and every head in the camp snapped toward the sound. The guard jumped to his feet, rifle raised. The drunk miner forgot about relieving himself and staggered back toward the fire, suddenly alert despite his intoxication. "What was that?" Someone shouted. "Probably just a coyote," another replied, but he did not sound convinced. "Check it out," the guard ordered two of the less drunk miners. They grabbed lanterns and began moving toward where Hannah's stone had landed, their lights swinging wildly in the darkness. In that moment of confusion, Tashunka disappeared completely into the shadows. Hannah could not see him, could not hear him, but she had to trust he had made it to safety. Her heart pounded as she watched the miners search the rocks where her stone had fallen. They poked around with their lanterns for several minutes before giving up, convinced it had been an animal. They returned to the fire, grumbling about being pulled away from their drinking. Hannah waited, every second an eternity. Where was Tashunka? Had he made it out? Had she saved him or condemned them both? The darkness pressed in on her, full of unknown threats. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder, and she nearly screamed before recognizing his touch. He was there beside her, both water pouches strapped across his chest. He put a finger to his lips, and they began to creep backward, away from the camp, moving with aching slowness. They did not stop moving until the mining camp's fire was no longer visible, until the sounds of voices had faded completely into the night. Only then did Tashunka allow them to rest. He handed Hannah one of the water pouches, and she drank deeply, the water tasting like life itself, cold and perfect and necessary. She drank until her stomach hurt, until her headache began to recede, until the world stopped tilting quite so dangerously. "You should not have done that," Tashunka said, but there was no anger in his voice, only concern. "If I hadn't, you would have been caught," Hannah replied. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but you risked yourself. You should have run the way I told you." "I couldn't," Hannah said simply. "You've saved my life more times than I can count." "It was my turn." Tashunka looked at her for a long moment in the moonlight. Something shifted in his expression, something she could not quite read. "You are learning," he said finally. "Learning when to be still and when to act. Learning to trust yourself. That is good." They rested briefly, then continued moving through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the mining camp. By dawn, they had climbed back into country where the streams ran free, where the water had not been stolen. They stopped beside a clear pool to rest and refill their pouches again, this time without fear or danger. Hannah washed her face and arms, scrubbing away days of accumulated dirt. She saw her reflection in the still water and barely recognized herself. Her face was thinner, harder, tanned dark by the sun. Her eyes held something new, something that had not been there before. She looked like someone who had survived, someone who had been tested and not broken. She looked like she belonged here. Tashunka watched her from where he sat on a nearby rock. "You have changed," he observed. "So have you," Hannah replied, though she was not sure that was true. He seemed eternal somehow, as if he had always been exactly what he was now. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. "No," he said, "I am the same, but you see me differently now. That is the change. At first you saw only a savage, a danger. Now you see a person. That is your change, not mine." Hannah felt shame flush her cheeks because he was right. She had been terrified of him when they first met, colored by all the stories and prejudices she had absorbed from her culture. She had expected violence, expected to be hurt or worse. Instead, he had shown her only kindness, only patience, teaching her how to survive in a world she did not understand. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for judging you before I knew you, for carrying those assumptions." Tashunka shrugged. "You are not the first, will not be the last. Your people fear what they do not understand, and they understand very little about mine. But you were willing to learn. That is what matters. Many never get that far." They sat together by the pool as the sun climbed higher, sharing dried meat and berries, recovering their strength. Hannah felt the tension of the previous night slowly draining away, replaced by a bone-deep fatigue that came from too many days of fear and exertion. She wanted to sleep for a week, wanted to stop running and hiding and constantly looking over her shoulder. "How much farther to the place you mentioned?" she asked. "The place in the northern hills where we'll be safe?" "2 more days," Tashunka said. "Maybe 3, depending on how fast we can travel. There is a valley there, very remote, very hidden. Few people know of it. My people use it sometimes when we need to hunt in these mountains. There is game, water, shelter. We can rest there, recover our strength, decide what comes next." What comes next? Hannah had not thought that far ahead, had been too focused on simple survival to consider the future. But now the question loomed before her. What would she do once they reached this safe place? She could not stay in the wilderness forever. She had no skills for it, no real knowledge of how to survive alone. But she also could not go back to the world she came from, could not return to a life of rules and restrictions and small, suffocating certainties. "What will you do?" she asked Tashunka. "After we reach the valley?" He was quiet for a moment, staring at the water. "I will return to my people," he said. "My time of exile has taught me what my father wanted me to learn. That fighting is sometimes necessary, but it is never the first choice. That wisdom means knowing when to push and when to bend. That anger, no matter how justified, can destroy as easily as any enemy. Will he welcome you back?" Hannah asked. "I do not know," Tashunka admitted, "but I must try. He is my father. My people are my people. I belong with them, even if they do not want me. That is what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. You do not abandon it when things become difficult." His words struck something deep in Hannah's chest. She had abandoned everything. Her home, her beliefs, her very identity. She had run from difficulty rather than facing it, had chosen distance over resolution. Was she a coward, or simply practical? She no longer knew. They rested through the hottest part of the day, then continued north as evening approached. The country they traveled through now was stunning, all red rock formations and twisted juniper trees, scattered wildflowers painting the spaces between stones. Hannah found herself noticing beauty she would have missed before, small details that made the harsh landscape somehow more tolerable. A lizard basking on a warm rock, the way light filtered through clouds, the pattern of lichen growing on stone. As darkness fell, they made camp in a sheltered spot between two large boulders. Tashunka built a small fire, and they cooked the last of their dried meat. Tomorrow they would need to hunt to replenish their supplies. But tonight they could rest, could sit by the fire and simply exist, without constant fear pressing down on them. Hannah found herself studying Tashunka across the flames, seeing him not as a guide or protector but as a person. A man with his own struggles, his own doubts, his own journey to complete. She wondered what he thought of her, this pale woman who had stumbled into his life and complicated everything. Did he resent her, pity her, or had something else developed between them? Some connection that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. "Thank you," she said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. Tashunka looked up from the stick he was whittling. "You have thanked me many times already." "I know," Hannah said. "But I keep finding new reasons to be grateful. Tonight, I'm grateful that you're teaching me to see the world differently, that you're patient with my ignorance, that you treat me like someone worth saving." He set down his whittling and met her eyes across the fire. "You are worth saving," he said simply. "All life is worth saving. But more than that, you have proven yourself. You threw that stone last night, knowing it would draw danger toward you, to give me a chance to escape. That was brave. That was the action of someone who understands what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. You may not believe it yet, but you are becoming strong." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Instead, she nodded and said, "I had a good teacher." They sat together as the fire burned down, two people from different worlds who had found common ground in the wilderness. And for this moment at least, that was enough. The fifth morning arrived with a sky so clear it hurt to look at. They broke camp early, both eager to reach the hidden valley Tashunka had promised. Hannah felt different today, lighter somehow, as if the events at the mining camp had burned away some final layer of who she used to be. Her feet still ached and her muscles still protested, but beneath the physical discomfort lay a growing sense of capability. She was not the same woman who had stumbled into that canyon nearly a week ago. They traveled through country that grew increasingly rugged, climbing steadily toward the mountains that had seemed so distant when they started. The trail, such as it was, wound through stands of pine that filled the air with their sharp, clean scent. Hannah found herself breathing deeper, pulling that scent into her lungs, feeling it awaken something primal and alive inside her. This was what freedom smelled like, she thought. This was what it meant to exist outside the suffocating boxes her old life had built around her. Around midday, they stopped to rest near a rocky outcrop. Tashunka suddenly held up his hand, his body going perfectly still. Hannah froze as well, her heart immediately jumping into her throat. She had learned to trust his instincts absolutely. When he signaled danger, danger was real. He pointed silently toward a cluster of rocks about 30 yards ahead. Hannah strained her eyes, but saw nothing at first. Then movement, subtle and deadly. A mountain lion, its tawny coat blending perfectly with the sun-baked stone, was stalking something in the brush below. The cat moved with liquid grace, each paw placed with absolute precision, its muscles coiling and releasing beneath its fur. Hannah held her breath, terrified the lion would notice them. But Tashunka seemed unconcerned. He simply waited, watching, and gradually Hannah understood why. The lion was not hunting them. It had its own prey to pursue, a deer that grazed unaware in a small clearing. They were merely observers to an ancient dance between predator and prey. The lion gathered itself, muscles bunching, and then it sprang. The deer had only a second to react, bolting with explosive speed, but the lion was faster. The chase lasted mere seconds before the cat brought down its prey. It was brutal and beautiful at the same time, nature stripped of all sentiment, revealing itself as pure function. The deer's struggles ended quickly, and the lion began to drag its kill toward cover. Only then did Tashunka move, leading Hannah in a wide circle around the feeding predator. They walked in silence for a long time after that, Hannah processing what she had witnessed. Death immediate and necessary, without cruelty or malice. Just the world operating according to its own laws. laws that cared nothing for human morality or judgment. And that could have been us, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Tashunka agreed, but it was not. The lion was not hungry for us. It had its own purpose. Everything in this world has its purpose. The lion hunts. The deer runs. The grass feeds the deer. The earth receives them all in the end. We are part of this cycle, not separate from it. Your people forget this, I think. You build your towns and churches and pretend you have escaped nature, but you have not. You are still part of it, whether you admit it or not. His words resonated with something Hannah had been feeling, but could not articulate. The West had stripped away all the comfortable lies of civilization, all the pretenses that humans were somehow above or beyond the natural world. Out here, you remembered quickly that you were just another animal trying to survive, no more important than the deer or the lion or the grass itself. By late afternoon, they reached a narrow pass between two towering rock faces. Tashunka led her through carefully, his hand occasionally reaching back to steady her on the treacherous footing. The pass opened suddenly into a valley that took Hannah's breath away. It was everything Tashunka had promised and more. A meadow, thick with grass, stretched before them, bisected by a clear stream that sparkled in the slanting sunlight. Trees ringed the valley, providing shelter and shade. In the distance, she could see what looked like natural caves carved into the cliff face. "This is it," Tashunka said simply. "This is the place where we can rest." They descended into the valley as the sun began its final descent toward the horizon. The grass came up to Hannah's knees, soft and green and alive. She wanted to run through it, to fall into it, to let it swallow her completely. Instead, she walked beside Tashunka toward the stream, where they both knelt and drank deeply from water so cold and pure it made her teeth ache. That night, they made camp near one of the caves. Tashunka built a proper fire, larger than any they had dared before, and the heat and light felt like luxury after days of small, cautious flames. He had set several snares earlier, and when he checked them at dusk, he returned with 2 fat rabbits. They cooked the meat slowly, and Hannah ate until her stomach was actually full for the first time in longer than she could remember. As they sat by the fire, both of them relaxed in a way that had been impossible before. Tashunka said, "Tomorrow I will hunt properly. There are elk in these mountains. If I am successful, we will have meat enough to last many days. You can rest, recover your strength. This place is safe. No miners, no traders, no men looking for trouble. Just us and the land." Hannah nodded, but she felt a strange tightness in her chest. Rest sounded wonderful, but she knew what would come after rest. Decisions, choices about what came next, where she would go, who she would become. The pause they had found here was temporary, a breath between one life and whatever came next. She was not ready to face that yet. "What's wrong?" Tashunka asked, reading something in her expression. Hannah struggled to find words. "I'm afraid," she admitted finally, "not of dying anymore, but of living. Of figuring out what to do with this life you helped me save. I don't know where I belong anymore. I can't go back to what I was, but I don't know how to move forward either." Tashunka poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "Belonging is not about place," he said. "It is about knowing yourself, about understanding what matters to you. You do not need to have all the answers now. You only need to keep walking, keep learning, keep becoming. The path reveals itself to those who are brave enough to walk it without knowing where it leads." "Is that what you're doing?" Hannah asked. "Walking without knowing?" He smiled, a rare expression that softened his entire face. "Yes, I thought I knew everything when I argued with my father, when I insisted that fighting was the only answer to our problems. But the land has taught me that I know very little. I'm walking back to my people with questions instead of answers, and that is harder but more honest. Maybe wisdom is just being comfortable with uncertainty." They talked late into the night, sharing stories from their vastly different lives, finding unexpected common ground in their struggles with identity and belonging. Hannah told him about her mother, about how she had been a quiet rebel in her own way, teaching Hannah to read forbidden books, to question the rigid doctrines her father preached. Tashunka told her about his grandfather, who had fought in battles against the encroaching settlers, but who had also advocated for understanding, for finding ways to coexist, even when it seemed impossible. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. Hannah lay down near the fire and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of sleep that comes only when the body finally feels safe enough to truly rest. When she woke, the sun was high overhead and Tashunka was gone. For a moment, panic flared, but then she saw the note he had left, small symbols drawn in the dirt near the fire. She could not read them, but she understood their meaning. He had gone hunting, would return before dark. Hannah spent the day exploring the valley, marveling at its hidden beauty. She found wild strawberries growing near the stream and ate them until her fingers were stained red with juice. She washed her clothes in the cold water and laid them on rocks to dry in the sun, spending the afternoon wearing only her undergarments, reveling in the feeling of sun on bare skin. For the first time in her life, she was completely alone, completely vulnerable, and completely unafraid. She thought about what Tashunka had said, about belonging being internal rather than external. Perhaps she did not need to find a place in the world. Perhaps she needed to create one, to define it for herself, rather than accepting someone else's definition. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Tashunka returned as the sun began to set, dragging behind him not an elk, but a young deer. It was more than enough meat for both of them. He showed Hannah how to properly dress the animal, how to preserve the meat so it would last, how to use every part so that nothing was wasted. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but he explained each step patiently, making sure she understood. "Why are you teaching me all this?" Hannah asked as they worked. "You know I'll probably never use these skills. I'll end up in some town somewhere, living behind walls again." Tashunka looked at her seriously. "Will you? Are you sure that is what you want? Because I see something different in you now. I see someone who has tasted freedom, who has learned to survive without walls and rules and other people's expectations. That person does not usually go back willingly to captivity." His words struck deep because they were true. Hannah could not imagine returning to a life of social calls and Sunday services, of pretending to be small and quiet and obedient. She had walked through fire and emerged transformed. Going back would be like asking a butterfly to crawl back into its cocoon. That night, they feasted on fresh venison, the meat tender and rich. They talked about the future in hypothetical terms, spinning possibilities like thread. Hannah could stay in the West, maybe find a settlement that needed a teacher, someplace where her education would be valued. Or she could keep moving, keep exploring, see what lay beyond the next mountain range. Tashunka would return to his people, but he suggested that their paths might cross again, that the West was smaller than it seemed, and travelers often encountered each other in unexpected places. On the third day in the valley, Hannah woke to find Tashunka already up, sitting near the stream, staring at something in his hands. She walked over and saw that he had woven a small bracelet from grass and leather, the pattern intricate and beautiful. He looked up as she approached. "For you," he said, holding it out. "Among my people, when someone saves your life, you give them something that took time and care to make. It is a way of saying that you value them, that the time spent on them was time well spent. You saved my life at the mining camp. I've not forgotten." Hannah took the bracelet, her throat tight with emotion. It was the most precious thing anyone had ever given her, not because of its material value, but because of what it represented. She slipped it onto her wrist where it fit perfectly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure it always." They spent the rest of the day preparing for departure. Tashunka would leave the next morning, heading east toward his people. Hannah would go west, toward a small town Tashunka knew of, where there was a mission that helped travelers. It was time to stop running and start building, time to figure out what kind of life she wanted to create. That final evening, they sat by the fire one last time, neither of them speaking much. There was too much to say and no way to say it adequately. They had shared something profound in this wilderness, something that transcended words. They had saved each other, taught each other, changed each other. Whatever happened next, wherever their paths led, they would carry pieces of each other forward. "I'm going to miss you," Hannah said finally, her voice thick with unshed tears. "And I you," Tashunka replied. "But missing someone means they mattered. That is not a bad thing. That is proof that we are capable of connection, that we can see beyond the barriers of culture and fear to the person underneath. That is rare. That is worth celebrating even as we say goodbye." Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They sat together until the fire burned down to embers, until the stars filled the sky above them in their millions. When they finally lay down to sleep, it was with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring endings and beginnings in equal measure. Morning came too quickly. They packed their belongings in silence, both moving slowly, reluctant to reach the moment of actual parting. When everything was ready, they stood facing each other near the stream, the water singing its endless song behind them. "Go slow," Hannah said suddenly, remembering their first real exchange. "You're rushing," Tashunka smiled at the callback. "The Lakota froze," he said, continuing the memory, then realized she'd noticed the danger before he did. "You have good instincts, Hannah Granger. Trust them. They will not lead you wrong." They embraced briefly, awkwardly, neither of them accustomed to such displays of affection. Then Tashunka turned and walked away toward the pass that led east, his figure growing smaller against the vastness of the landscape. Hannah watched until he disappeared completely, until she could no longer distinguish him from the rocks and trees that surrounded him. Only then did she turn west, toward her own uncertain future. Her hand went to the bracelet on her wrist, touching it like a talisman. She had entered this wilderness as one person and was leaving it as another. She had learned that strength came in many forms, that survival was as much about adaptation as endurance, that kindness could exist even in the harshest places if you were brave enough to offer it and accept it. As she walked, she thought about the title of her own story, the words that would later define this chapter of her life. "Go slow, you're rushing," she had said, and in those 4 words had saved both their lives. Sometimes wisdom came not from careful deliberation, but from instinct, from paying attention to details others missed, from trusting yourself even when you had every reason to doubt. The West stretched before her vast and unknowable, full of dangers and possibilities in equal measure. But Hannah was no longer afraid. She had walked through the fire and discovered that she was made of stronger stuff than she had ever imagined. Whatever came next, she would face it with the courage and resourcefulness she had learned in these mountains, with the lessons Tashunka had taught her written on her heart. The sun climbed higher, turning the rocks to gold. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. Hannah adjusted her pack and kept walking, one foot in front of the other, toward a future she would write for herself. And if the path was uncertain, if the destination was unclear, well, that was just the nature of freedom. You could not control it or predict it. You could only embrace it and see where it led. Behind her, the hidden valley remained, a sanctuary between worlds, waiting for the next lost soul who needed shelter. And ahead, the vast wilderness of the West opened its arms, indifferent and magnificent, ready to test her again, to teach her again, to transform her again. Hannah smiled and walked into it willingly, no longer running from her past, but walking toward her future, and that made all the difference. She touched the bracelet on her wrist one more time, feeling the texture of the woven grass and leather, remembering the hands that had made it, the man who had saved her life and taught her how to save herself. "Some people came into your life for a season," her mother used to say, "and in that season they changed everything." Tashunka had been that person for her, and she would carry his lessons forward, would honor the gift he had given her by living fully, by being brave, by trusting herself. The mountains rose ahead, beautiful and terrible, promising nothing and everything at once. Hannah squared her shoulders and kept walking, her shadow stretching long behind her in the morning light, a survivor walking into the sun, and somewhere in that moment between leaving and arriving, she finally understood what it meant to be free. 3 years had passed since Hannah Granger walked out of that hidden valley alone. 3 years of building a life from the scattered pieces of who she had been and the raw materials of who she was becoming. The West had a way of either breaking people or forging them into something harder, and Hannah had emerged from the crucible, transformed in ways she was still discovering. She stood now on the porch of a small schoolhouse she had built with her own hands, with help from the community that had slowly come to trust her. The town was called Redemption, a name someone had chosen with either great irony or great hope. Hannah was never sure which. It sat at the edge of the Montana Territory, far enough from the main trails that trouble rarely found it, close enough to trading routes that supplies could be obtained when necessary. It was a place for people who wanted to be left alone, who had reasons for keeping their pasts quiet. The schoolhouse had been Hannah's dream, her way of giving back to a community that had taken her in when she arrived 3 years ago. Dirty and half-starved, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a story about being separated from a wagon train. They had not pressed for details, these frontier people who understood that everyone carried secrets. They had simply given her work, first cleaning at the general store, then helping the doctor's wife with her garden, then teaching the children, basic letters and numbers in the back room of the church. But Hannah had wanted more than a back room. She had wanted a real school, a place where children could learn not just reading and arithmetic, but how to think for themselves, how to question, how to see the world with clear eyes unburdened by prejudice. It had taken 2 years of saving, every penny, of convincing the town council, of gathering materials and finding people willing to help with construction. But now it stood solid and real, a testament to what was possible when you refused to accept limitations. The building was simple, just one large room with windows on 3 sides to let in light. A wood stove in the corner for winter, benches. Hannah had built herself using techniques a carpenter had taught her in exchange for teaching his daughter to read. On the wall hung a map of the territories, and beside it a smaller map Hannah had drawn herself, showing the lands of various tribal nations, the Lakota and Cheyenne and Arapaho and others. She taught her students that these were not empty lands, waiting to be claimed, but home to peoples with their own histories, their own ways of knowing the world. It had caused controversy, of course. Some parents had pulled their children from her school, declaring her a savage sympathizer, dangerous and unfit to teach. But others had stayed, and slowly, grudgingly, even some of the critics had admitted that their children were learning, that Hannah Granger might be unconventional, but she was effective. The school had survived its first year, then its second, and now in its 3rd year, enrollment had actually grown. Hannah touched the bracelet on her wrist, a habit she had developed over the years. The grass had long since worn away, but the leather remained, darkened with age and wear. She never took it off. It was her reminder of where she had been, of the man who had saved her life and taught her how to survive. She wondered often where Tashunka was now, whether he had reconciled with his father, whether he ever thought of the pale woman he had guided through the wilderness. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. A rider was approaching from the east, moving fast, dust rising behind the horse. Hannah felt the old alertness kick in, the wariness that never quite left her, despite 3 years of relative peace. Out here, riders moving fast usually meant trouble of one kind or another. The rider slowed as he approached the schoolhouse, and Hannah recognized him as Tom Brewster, who ran the telegraph office. He dismounted quickly, his face flushed with exertion or excitement or both. "Miss Granger," he called out, "there's been news, big news from Washington. They've ratified a new treaty with the Lakota, commissioners coming through next month." To explain the terms, wants to meet with townspeople, hear concerns. Hannah felt her stomach tighten. Treaties between the government and tribal nations rarely ended well for the tribes. They were documents designed to transfer land, to push people onto smaller and smaller parcels of territory, to break promises as soon as they became inconvenient. "What are the terms?" she asked. Tom shook his head. "Don't know all the details yet. Something about the Black Hills, about mining rights. The commissioner says it's fair, that both sides benefit. But you know how these things go." Yes, Hannah knew exactly how these things went. She had spent 3 years reading everything she could about the history of relations between settlers and native peoples. She had learned about broken treaties, about forced relocations, about massacres disguised as battles. She had learned that her people, the people who looked like her and spoke like her, had committed atrocities in the name of progress and civilization. It was a heavy knowledge to carry. "Thank you for telling me, Tom," she said. "I'll spread the word to the families with children in school." Tom nodded and rode off, leaving Hannah alone with her thoughts. She went back inside the schoolhouse and sat at her desk, staring at the map on the wall. The Black Hills were sacred to the Lakota. She knew that much. Taking them would be more than a political maneuver. It would be a spiritual wound. She wondered if Tashunka was there, if he was fighting to protect his people's land, if he was in danger. That night, Hannah lay awake in her small cabin behind the schoolhouse, listening to the wind move through the pine trees. She thought about the past 3 years, about how she had tried to honor the lessons Tashunka had taught her. She had learned to hunt and fish, skills that kept her fed during lean times. She had learned to read the weather, to understand the rhythms of the land. She had learned that strength came not from dominating nature, but from working with it, from understanding your place within the larger web of life. But she had also learned that individual survival was not enough. She had built her school, not just to secure her own future, but to try, in some small way, to change the future for others. If she could teach even a few children to see native peoples as human beings, rather than obstacles to be removed, if she could plant seeds of empathy and understanding, maybe that would matter. Maybe it would not be enough to stop the tide of violence and displacement, but it would be something. 2 weeks later, a different rider came to Redemption. This one arrived at dawn, his horse lathered with sweat, clearly pushed to its limits. Hannah was already awake, preparing lessons for the day, when she heard the commotion in the street. She stepped outside to see a crowd gathering around the rider, who was speaking urgently to the sheriff. Hannah pushed through the crowd, some instinct telling her this concerned her directly. The rider was young, maybe 20, with the look of someone who had seen things no one that age should see. His clothes were torn and blood-stained, his face haggard with exhaustion and fear. "What's happened?" the sheriff was asking. "Attack!" the rider gasped. Settlers moving into the Black Hills claimed the treaty gave them rights to mine there. Lakota warriors came down, said the treaty was a lie, that the land was still theirs. Fighting broke out. People died on both sides. "It's a massacre, Sheriff. It's going to be war." The crowd erupted in angry voices, people calling for the army to intervene, for the Indians to be punished, for revenge. Hannah felt sick. This was how it always started, with misunderstanding and violence spiraling. Out of control, with both sides convinced of their righteousness, with the result being death and suffering for everyone involved. She pushed her way back through the crowd and returned to her cabin, her mind racing. She knew she should stay out of it, should keep her head down and focus on her school. Getting involved in politics between settlers and native peoples was dangerous, could cost her everything she had built. But she could not shake the image of Tashunka from her mind, could not stop wondering if he was caught up in this violence, if he was fighting or dying or already dead. That afternoon, Hannah closed the school early and rode out to see Doc Hendricks, the town's physician and one of the few people in Redemption who had traveled extensively in native territories. She found him in his office organizing medical supplies. He looked up as she entered, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Hannah," he said, "what brings you here? Not sick, I hope?" "No," she said. "I need information about what's happening in the Black Hills, about the Lakota. You've worked with them before, treated their sick. Do you still have contacts?" Doc Hendricks set down the bottles he was organizing and studied her carefully. "I do," he said slowly. "Why do you ask?" Hannah hesitated, then decided on honesty. 3 years ago, a Lakota man saved my life, taught me how to survive when I had nothing. I owe him everything. If there's going to be war, I need to know if there's any way to stop it, any way to help." The doctor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "There's a trading post 3 days' ride north. A man there named Jonas Whitfield. He's married to a Lakota woman, has connections to several bands. He sometimes acts as an intermediary, tries to prevent violence when he can. It's dangerous work and mostly thankless. But he's one of the few people both sides will talk to. If you want to help, he'd be the one to approach." Hannah felt something shift inside her, a decision crystallizing. "Thank you," she said. "Can you watch the school for a few days? Tell people I had to travel for supplies or some such thing." Doc Hendricks looked at her with concern. "Hannah, you don't have to do this. You've built a good life here. Don't throw it away on something you might not be able to fix." "I know," Hannah said. "But I have to try. I can't just sit here knowing people are dying, knowing there might be something, anything, I could do to help. He gave me my life back. The least I can do is try to preserve his." She left that evening traveling light, carrying only essentials and what money she had saved. The ride north was hard, through country that reminded her painfully of those desperate days 3 years ago when she had been running for her life. But she was different now, stronger, more capable. She knew how to navigate this land, knew which plants were edible, knew how to find water, knew how to move quietly when necessary. The trading post appeared on the 3rd day, a ramshackle collection of buildings in a valley surrounded by hills. Hannah approached cautiously, aware that tensions were high and strangers were often viewed with suspicion. A man emerged from the main building as she dismounted, tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that missed nothing. "You're a long way from anywhere," he said. It was not a question. "Are you Jonas Whitfield?" Hannah asked. "Depends on who's asking and why. My name is Hannah Granger. Doc Hendricks sent me. He said you might be able to help prevent what's building toward war in the Black Hills." Whitfield's expression shifted slightly, some of the wariness easing. "Hendricks sent you? That old fool still trying to save the world." But there was affection in his voice. He gestured toward the building. "Come inside. We'll talk." The interior of the trading post was cluttered but organized, filled with goods from both settler and native cultures. A woman worked in the back, sorting through bundles of furs. She looked up as they entered, and Hannah saw immediately that she was Lakota, her features proud and strong, her eyes intelligent and assessing. "This is my wife, Wasula," Whitfield said. "She knows more about what's happening than I do. The news travels fast through her people's networks." Wasula studied Hannah for a long moment before speaking. "Oh, why does a white woman care about Lakota troubles?" Her English was accented but clear. Hannah took a breath and told her story, all of it. The wagon train, the fever, Tashunka, the mining camp, the hidden valley. She left nothing out, showed them the bracelet on her wrist as proof. When she finished, Wasula's expression had softened. "Tashunka," she said. "I know this name. He is of the Oglala band, son of Chief Black Elk. He returned to his people 2 summers ago. He speaks often of finding wisdom in exile, of the need for his people to adapt while preserving what matters most. He is respected but also controversial. Some call him too soft, too willing to consider peace." Hannah's heart leapt. He was alive. He had returned to his people. "Is he safe with the fighting in the Black Hills?" Wasula exchanged a glance with her husband. "Safe is not a word that means much anymore," she said. "The treaty the government speaks of, it was signed by chiefs who did not represent all Lakota people, who had no authority to give away the Black Hills. Many bands, including the Oglala, say they will not honor it. They will fight to protect what is sacred. Your friend Tashunka, he has been trying to find another way to negotiate directly with miners and settlers to create agreements that might prevent open warfare. But it is difficult. There is too much anger, too much history of betrayal. Can I see him? Hannah asked. Can I help somehow? Whitfield shook his head. It's too dangerous. The situation is volatile. White people entering Lakota camps right now, even with good intentions, could be killed. And if Lakota come to settler areas, the same. Both sides are on edge, ready to strike at shadows. Hannah felt frustration rise in her chest. She had come all this way only to be told she was helpless. There has to be something, she insisted. Wasula looked at her thoughtfully. Perhaps there is, she said slowly. In 1 week there will be a council. Representatives from several Lakota bands, and also some settlers who wish to find peace. It will be held on neutral ground, at a place sacred to my people, but also accessible to whites. If you could attend, if you could speak as someone who has lived in both worlds, who has been helped by my people and knows we are human, not monsters, perhaps your voice might carry weight. I'll do it, Hannah said immediately. Whitfield warned her of the risks. She could be attacked by either side or both. She could return to Redemption to find her reputation destroyed, her school closed, her life's work in ruins. But Hannah had learned 3 years ago that some things were worth risking everything for. This was one of them. The week passed slowly. Hannah stayed at the trading post, helping Wasula and Jonas with their work, learning more about Lakota culture and history. Wasula taught her some basic words in Lakota, correcting her pronunciation patiently. Hannah taught Wasula's children, 2 bright-eyed girls, who were learning to navigate both their mother's culture and their father's. It felt natural, this blending of worlds, proof that coexistence was possible if people chose to see each other as human first. On the day of the council, Hannah rode out with Whitfield and Wasula, her stomach churning with nervousness. The meeting place was a grove of ancient cottonwoods beside a clear stream, the kind of place that felt holy even to someone like Hannah, who had long ago lost faith in formal religion. Already gathered were perhaps 30 people, split roughly evenly between Lakota and settlers, though the 2 groups kept to opposite sides of the clearing. And there, standing with the Lakota delegation, was Tashunka. He looked older, lines around his eyes that had not been there before, but also more settled, more at peace with himself. He wore traditional clothing, his hair decorated with feathers, a leader among his people. When he saw Hannah, his eyes widened with unmistakable recognition and something else, something that looked like joy. The council began with speeches from both sides, most of them rehashing old grievances and hurling accusations. Hannah listened, her heart sinking, as it became clear that no one was really hearing anyone else. They were just waiting for their turn to speak, to defend their own position, to prove they were right and the other side was wrong. This was going nowhere. Finally, when there was a lull in the accusations, Hannah stood. All eyes turned to her, and she felt the weight of their attention, the suspicion and curiosity mixed together. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "My name is Hannah Granger," she said. 3 years ago I was dying in a canyon, alone and abandoned by my own people. A Lakota warrior found me. He could have killed me. He could have left me to die. Instead, he gave me water. He taught me how to survive. He protected me from men who would have hurt me. He asked for nothing in return except that I keep walking, keep living, keep learning. His name is Tashunka, and he is standing right there. Without him, I would be bones in the desert. Because of him, I built a school where I teach children that the first peoples of this land are not savages, but human beings with wisdom and culture and sacred connections to this earth. I teach them that we can learn from each other instead of destroying each other." She paused, looking around at the assembled faces. Some were hostile, some skeptical, but some were listening, really listening. She continued, "I'm not naive. I know there are real conflicts here, real disagreements about land and resources and futures. But I also know that every person here, Lakota or settler, loves their children and wants them to have a future. We can't build that future on blood and hatred. We have to find another way, even if it's harder, even if it requires us to let go of old certainties and comfortable hatreds. I'm not asking anyone to forget the past or ignore real wrongs. I'm asking us to imagine a future where we don't keep repeating the same patterns of violence and betrayal, where we actually try something different. She sat down, her hands shaking. The silence that followed felt immense. Then Tashunka stood. He spoke in Lakota first, his words flowing with the rhythm of his native tongue, then switched to English. "This woman speaks truth," he said. 3 years ago I was in exile, sent away by my father because I believed violence was the only answer to our people's problems. Walking the land taught me differently. Helping Hannah Granger survive taught me that sometimes the bravest thing is not to fight, but to extend a hand to someone different from yourself. I returned to my people with this knowledge, and I've been trying to teach it. Not all agree with me. Some say I am weak, that I have betrayed our ways. But I believe our ways include wisdom, include the understanding that we are all connected, that hurting others ultimately hurts ourselves. The Black Hills are sacred to us, yes, but so is life. So is the future of our children. We cannot protect one by destroying the other. His words created a ripple through the Lakota delegation, some nodding, others frowning. But the conversation had shifted. For the first time, people were not just arguing positions, but sharing experiences, acknowledging each other's humanity. It was not a solution, not yet. But it was a beginning. The council lasted until sunset, and by the end, they had agreed to form a smaller working group, representatives from both sides, who would meet regularly to negotiate specific disputes and try to prevent violence from escalating. It was not peace, but it was a foundation on which peace might be built. Hannah was asked to serve on this group, as was Tashunka, their shared history making them bridges between worlds. As the council broke up, Tashunka approached Hannah. They stood facing each other, 3 years of separation and growth between them. Finally he smiled and said, "You learned well. You speak with wisdom now, not just survival." "I had a good teacher," Hannah replied, echoing her words from years ago. They talked late into the night, catching up on 3 years of living. He told her about his reconciliation with his father, about the challenges of leading people who did not always want to follow, about his fears for his people's future. She told him about her school, about building a life from nothing, about trying to honor what he had taught her. As they talked, Hannah realized that what she had felt 3 years ago had not faded but deepened. This was not just gratitude or friendship. It was something more profound, a connection that transcended culture and circumstance. Before they parted, Tashunka took her hand and said, "The path we walk now will not be easy. There will be setbacks, betrayals, moments when it seems impossible. But if we keep walking, if we keep trying, perhaps we can create something worth leaving to those who come after us. Will you walk this path with me?" Hannah understood he was asking about more than just the working group, more than just politics and peace negotiations. He was asking if she was willing to build a life that existed between worlds, that honored both their heritages while creating something new. It would mean facing opposition from both sides, would mean constant struggle and compromise. But it would also mean walking beside someone who understood her completely, who had seen her at her worst and helped her become her best. "Yes," she said simply, "I will walk this path with you, wherever it leads." 3 years after stumbling into a canyon, half dead and desperate, Hannah Granger had found not just survival, but purpose. She had found not just a life, but a mission. And she had found not just a friend, but a partner in building the kind of world she wanted to see. The road ahead would be hard, she knew that. But she had learned in the wilderness that the hardest paths often led to the most beautiful destinations. As she rode back toward redemption the next day, her hand went to the bracelet on her wrist and she smiled. Some stories did not end, they just kept unfolding, surprising you with new chapters you never saw coming. And this story, hers and Tashanka's, was still being written, one careful step at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.